Hello, welcome to Books and Brews,
the place where beer and literature meet.
With your host, certified Cicerone Michael Agnew.
And Laura Mosica, author of the Bluebells Chronicles.
Each month we invite a guest author to read their words and talk about writing while sipping beers specially paired with their work.
This month's guest is Christine Ellsworth.
So sit back,
pop a cold one,
and dive into some books
and brews.
We are started into episode, hang on, I have a folder up so I can actually see.
So you know.
Episode 32. Welcome everybody to episode 32 of the Books and Brews podcast. The last couple of episodes, we have screwed up what number we were on.
I double checked it this time. I went down the list, checked all the way back to 25, made sure we hadn't forgotten to number anyone.
No, I have to number them when I upload them. So otherwise.
So what you're saying is I can blame the mistake entirely on you.
Well, I was, so 2 episodes ago, I was the first one that said the wrong number. So yeah, you can blame them. It's all my fault.
Here we go. I've had a lot of things blamed on me this month. So, I'm just trying to share.
Share the guilt.
Yeah, right. So how's your month been, Michael?
Been pretty good. I've had several Banjo Revelations.
What are those?
So I went and I've seen a couple of shows with banjos now. The first one was a Chicago bluegrass band that's really well known. And I spent the entire night carefully watching the banjo player, particularly the banjo player's left hand. Because one of my revelations is I've been spending all this effort on my right hand, the picking hand, and just suddenly realized, oh, I need to spend time on my left hand because that's actually where the action is.
That's an important revelation.
Yeah. But so I was watching him carefully, and it gave me the insight that the things that, so when I went to my banjo teacher first, when I first approached him, I said, I know how to play 5 or 6 songs the way I learned them, but I don't know how to play the banjo. And watching him, I saw him doing all of the things that my banjo teacher is giving me. And I realized, oh, he was teaching me how to play the banjo.
Cool.
And it's really hard.
I was going to ask, is it really difficult to make that change now that you've been doing something else for 2 or 3 years?
It is because he's teaching me like basic chords.
Okay, so what were you playing before, if not chords?
So hard. Like making my fingers do this.
Yeah, that crunched up
quickly between them. It's just so hard.
Well, what were you playing before? Weren't you playing chords before?
No. So these are like chords you would play if you were playing backup. So
right.
And
so you were playing
the songs that I learned, it was lead parts.
Okay.
Chords different on a banjo than a guitar?
What's that?
Are chords different on a banjo than a guitar?
Yeah. I mean, it's the same principle, but
yeah, because the banjo has 4 strings, right?
Sure.
5. Five, but they play differently than a guitar. I mean, a couple of them are just drone strings. They don't do anything.
Right.
You hit them
right. I figured at least one was. Yeah. I was curious. My month has been a whole lot quieter than the last 6 or 8 months because, as you know, I've been in the process of making my not the 4th move, the 3rd move, but this is the 4th house I've lived in 12 months now. Yeah, it's been a crazy year of upheaval. So we're finally settled. And so we're starting to research how to have a garden because neither of us has ever grown a vegetable garden before. So we've got our land picked out where we're going to put it on our property. And we actually started a YouTube channel that we called 2 Wordsmiths and a Wolfhound in the Great North Woods. And so we're going to document as we pick out this land. So we actually uploaded that. It's uploaded, scheduled to show up in 3 or 4 days.
Nice.
And it's wilderness now. So Chris was out there. He and my boys have been chopping trees to build a gun range out there. So, we've got a skeet shooter, so they're having fun with that. So we're documenting this and what it takes to go from complete wilderness, which is kind of what we have now, to actually using the land. So that's been fun. We've been out there in the snow, and the wolfhound is doing her part. She's running around looking like a really cool dog, and then I get film of it, and I can use that in the video. So the reason I actually brought that up was as I've been out there, I was kind of curious how, if you're still doing the mushroom thing. Is it called foraging?
No, yeah, the season's over.
Foraging.
Season's been
Okay.
over for a while. And I
thought it might be.
I didn't go forage much this year. I went right at the beginning of the season, and
Okay.
that was about it.
Yeah, I was thinking, whenever the season is, you and Masako should come up here so you can, show me if there's anything good on this land.
I bet there's some morels out there.
Or else I'll have to look it up. But see, I want you to come up and put it in your mouth first. I'm not going to eat any mushrooms.
I know like 5 varieties that I'm looking for, and I pretty much stick with those.
Okay, that's probably smart, if they work. So, yeah.
I haven't read anything, so you're going to have to cover me once again.
Well, you know what?
I don't know what happened to me. I went through this long period where I was reading constantly, and I was reading novels, which I hadn't done for a decade probably. And then all of a sudden it stopped.
Have you just gotten busier, or what happened?
No, I don't know. I just stopped reading books.
Just didn't get to it. Well, it hasn't been a good month for me for reading either. And I don't really know why, because the unpacking is mostly done. Like I went out a few days ago. We have a detached garage with a workshop in it, and it's 99%, at least I thought it was, Chris's tools and his 3D printers and, all this stuff that says, and I was like, I don't know where to put this stuff, but it really needed help. So I gave it a try, and I actually found that I could figure out how to organize most of it. So that's, I've been doing things like that, but I should have had time to read, but I just really haven't this month.
All right. Well, if neither of us have read anything, then who's our guest?
Well, let me see.
And has our guest been reading anything?
I'm struggling to read too. I have a stack of books that are on my list, but I have no problem buying them, however. I can still acquire them.
Well, we're pretty good at buying the books here too. So let's see. My face is going to get very washed out because I can use some light to read here. So Christine Madline Ellsworth has just released her first book of poetry published by Potter's Wheel Publishing. Here is the collection of poems tracing the arc of transitions in a contemporary woman's life, from childhood fascinations to adult issues such as domestic violence, marriage, and divorce. Ellsworth shares many relatable experiences. Christine holds BA and MA degrees in English literature from Moorhead State University and Marquette University, respectively. She is a member of the Jackpine Writers Bloc, and her poetry has appeared in issues of Talking Stick. And, I didn't finish that sentence because I thought there was an and. Her work has also appeared in Moorhead State University's Red Weather and the South Dakota State Poetry Society's, is that pronounced Pasque? Petals. Okay, she is currently working towards certification as a certified applied poetry therapy facilitator. That is a mouthful. Have you actually finished that, Christine?
No,
Okay.
It's a 3-year program, and I started in 2018, and I should be done this year, but no, not yet.
Close. Yeah, you're really close. I had read something somewhere that made me think you had finished it, and I think it's that you're going to be facilitating something somewhere.
Yes.
Okay, that's why I thought you must have finished it. I read all of that through the International Federation of Biblio-Poetry Therapy, which, who knew there was such a thing?
Right.
3 of us do, and our 5.8 million listeners. Ellsworth was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and currently lives in Windermere, North Dakota, with her blue heeler and 2 cats. Her book is available in print and Kindle versions on Amazon. She is available for book signings and poetry events, both electronic and in person. So welcome, Christine. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura and Michael. Pleasure to be here.
So what is our first beer?
What is our first beer? Our first beer is from Urban Growler Brewing, which is in Minneapolis. It is Bubble Days IPA. It is a bold brash. I want to say it's a double IPA, but I don't see anything on here telling me what the alcohol content is. Anyway, it's a big, bold brash IPA. It's good that you didn't find this one, Laura, because you'd hate it.
You know what? I'm developing a sense for that. I saw the letters IPA. Said, what did I ever do to you?
All right. So the reason I chose this one is that this first poem is basically about strong women going up against patriarchy and the social norms that belong under that. Urban Growler is a women-owned brewery. It was the first woman-owned brewery in Minnesota. And I was looking for the boldest beer that they make, at least that they offer in cans. They might have something else on tap at the brewery, but at least what they offer in cans in a store is this Bubble Days IPA is the boldest, brashest IPA that they have. It is actually quite delicious. It tastes like a double IPA. It tastes strong. It's maltier than a lot of IPAs would be. And it's got this great like citrus, tropical, mango, guava kind of hop flavor to it. Bitterness isn't so awful, isn't so extreme, Laura. Maybe you would have not.
Maybe I would have not hated it too badly.
Yeah.
Hey, I do have a question, and hopefully, I'm double tasking while you were talking, because I saw that once again, my printer printed out my notes in this little point. And I didn't catch it until just now. So I'm trying to find this on my computer so I can read what it actually says. And so, but what makes an IP bold or brash? What would that mean to the layperson?
What makes an IPA bold or brash? Alcohol content and excessive hopping. So it's aggressively bitter, and the hop flavors and aromas just sort of jump out of the glass. Sometimes before you even bring it up to your nose, you just pour it and it's like.
So it's kind of like the wasabi of beer. Is that what you're saying?
Kind of.
Well, I might like it then. I might have it with my.
It won't clear your sinuses.
It will or it won't.
It won't.
Oh, well, that's the fun of wasabi. You take a bite. So, Christine, we are ready for your first poem, What to Wear, Saving France.
Thank you. Thank you. My mouth is watering so much. I'm going to have to swallow. That looks so good. What to wear while saving France. Don't worry, it's been saved already by a woman who looked much like we do today. And what with our cropped hair and our menswear, we would have burned at the stake too, since most of us do hear divine voices, such as what guides us to plant tomatoes today and not wait till tomorrow, or when to open the door to a stray cat. It's the same wisdom that taught us as primeval women to draw new life from inside ourselves and bravely sever that cord, setting all of us free. Some call it witchcraft or strange lunar influences, and it wasn't just the old kings and those middle-aged Burgundians who were moved to strike flint by such unparalleled power. These days, you'll not be killed for wearing trousers or offering good counsel to say the mayor, but you'll still need to advance hard against the prejudicial ranks and rally an army to reason when the need arises, as it will, as it does daily, to thwart that ancient fear. Wear your body to such events as though you yourself own it.
I always find it interesting listening to a poet read their poems as opposed to reading it in my head, because they always read it with their own unique inflections, and it often comes across differently. This light just isn't working well, is it? Now I kind of look like a ghoul with dark shadows under my eyes. it's like, am I going to be able to read the stuff or not? So let's start with the basics. How long have you been writing poetry and what got you started?
I've been writing poetry since I was about 17. And I think the first poem I remember writing was about my son, who I didn't give birth to for, about 10 years, but I sort of anticipated him. So my first poem was to my son. Yeah.
A son who is not yet born.
Right. Yeah. I was anticipating him.
Interesting.
The whole gist of that poem was, I want you to feel. And I think that's what poetry does for me. And I want poetry to do for people. That's fascinating. Was it that you just wanted to have a boy, or was it more of an actual premonition? It was a premonition. It really was. And he was my first.
That's amazing. I have to tell you kind of a funny story along those lines. There is one of these kind of, memes, Facebook games that goes around where you plug in your profile or whatever, and it tells you how many kids you'll have. So I did this, I don't know, a couple years ago, and it told me I would have 7 kids. Well, the joke of it is I actually have 9. So, so of course, a lot of people had a lot of fun with that. Which 2 aren't yours? Which 2 do you need to get rid of? That's utterly fascinating. Now, I want to bring up, it's just kind of by dumb luck that I came across this article. It came through my email from a site that I subscribe to, and it is called Reading Poetry Will Save the World. So I want to ask you first, how do you think poetry impacts the world?
Well, historically, poetry really started as, prayer. What we think of poetry today really was prayer. And, you're telling a story, you're chanting. And medieval and even older than that, doctors would chant and pray to heal you because this is what we had. And there's power in words, and the feeling that you put in words can be translated, and others can pick up on that and transition and learn and grow. And whenever we grow, we often heal.
And I believe you're right about this. I want to read this to you because it's a completely different take on poetry than anything I've ever heard before. And most of this is direct quote. The last couple lines are maybe a little bit paraphrased to shorten them. But among the things this article said was, a person trained in poetry can look beyond the physical and literal in reality and perceive the ideas and relationships underneath. The majority of Americans in the past, and they make the point that poetry used to be a very standard thing in education, and it no longer is. So he says the majority of Americans in the past could be confronted with various experiences in nature, politics, culture, or religion and make some sense of them. They could handle abstractions, complexity, and ambiguity more comfortably. They could see value in intangible ideas. Today's adults process more, but analyze less. That leads to people being more susceptible to propaganda. And he's saying this all stems from poetry or lack of poetry, that poetry makes us think in ways that prose does not. What would be your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I'm thinking the synapses in my head right now as I'm, thinking about Walt Whitman and thinking about how in days gone by, children were encouraged to, memorize poetry.
Right.
And through, and you think about all the Platonic plays, and I'm going way back there into Grecian times where whole plays were memorized. And this is a capacity of the brain to increase and learn that we don't have these days. So I don't know if I've answered your question or not, but
well, I think so.
I absolutely think that poetry's that important.
And so that would bring us to a completely unplanned, spontaneous question. What would be your suggestion to convince people of the value of poetry? I mean, I myself, when I formerly was working on getting a band started in a small Catholic school, I had a hard road convincing the parents that music mattered. How would you convince schools to start reemphasizing poetry like they used to, or just to bring it back at all, really?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I think what springs to mind are poetry slams. And even here in North Dakota, we're still working on getting a North Dakota Poetry Society up and running. But right now, the North Dakota Arts Council does, work with poetry slams throughout the high schools in North Dakota. And I think this is really important to allow kids a voice that they don't have, like music does as well.
Right.
And for self-expression in any way that doesn't necessarily have to fit into a standard poetic expression like a sonnet or a villanelle or any of the forms that we take for we've been trained in. Poetry can be more expressive and I think that will really help children express themselves.
See, I'm a huge fan of those forms. And part of the reason is I think by working within them, you do free form better when you start doing that.
That's well said. Yeah.
And it teaches you to think in ways that you wouldn't. And that actually relates to a question sort of that I have coming up for you. And this is, maybe a little bit more on the mundane side, but the poem clearly references Joan of Arc. Is she of particular historical interest to you, or was she just convenient for this poem?
This poem arose from a writing prompt from the group that I belong to, who are poetry therapists. Strange writing prompt, right? And, what to wear while saving France. And I immediately went to Joan of Arc. I did some research. I learned more quickly than I knew about her. She, was trying to get a pope overthrown and ousted. And she was jailed for that, but she was actually burned at the stake because she was set free from jail and instructed not to wear men's clothing. And when she was released from jail, she put on the men's clothing. She wore pants. That's why she burned at the stake. Not for her political or her, and her words from God. So that was really a revelation to me.
That's a side of history I've never heard.
Me either, yeah. And so
fascinating.
We've come a long way as women in, we're free to cut our hair more how we want and of course wear pants, but and we're I'm thinking of Kamala Harris right now as being an advisee to the mayor, and we won't be killed for these things, but we still are having issues politically. I'm thinking about stuff in Texas, etc. So I think the poem has some urgency to it.
So I wanted to ask one last question before we go on to your number 2, even though we're cutting it right up to our limit here. Your Amazon page for your book says of the book, transformation is the residual effect of these poems. What do those words mean to you exactly? And do you feel that reading these poems will be transformative to people, and why?
Yes, and I've had.
In what way will they? Maybe I should ask.
I've had feedback in that sense, because many of us, as we move from young adult to middle age and to my age, which is above that, we're trying to figure out what it all means. And so when you have a set of poetry that kind of takes you along along that journey, and takes you through some of the hard things that maybe many of us have experienced, like domestic violence, etc., things like that, and some of the junk that's going on around us in the broader scheme, like the pandemic and our environment. I think when you read this and you see other people are working through it and moving on, it gives you some help and guidance and belief that you can too.
Mhm. And I think that's a very good point. It's actually the point of some of the books that I was editing up till about a month ago, when I just finally had to say, I've got to get to my own projects here. But the point of those books was very often, look, I've overcome a lot of very difficult things. This is how I did it, and you can too. And so, you're doing it via poetry. So, Michael, I think we are ready for beer number 2.
Beer number 2, and I had the realization that I poured this actually not that long ago on the podcast. So sorry, everybody, to repeat myself, but it was the appropriate beer. This is Saison du Pont. It is a Belgian style. It is a Belgian Saison. It is indeed the benchmark example of a Belgian Saison.
So I have a question before you go further. You see my unique kind of cap on this?
Yeah, cork the cage.
I suppose because it looks a little bit like a champagne bottle, I'm expecting to blow. Is that likely to happen?
Yes, it is highly
Oh, that's not the answer I wanted.
I mean, it's not going to spout. It's not going to spout like champagne, but it is highly effervescent. And
you want to give me a tip on how I even do this?
It's not going to blow the cork out when you take the cage off.
Oh, I just kind of loosen it up like this.
Yeah.
Kind of twist it. Okay.
Just to take it off, and then just like woodgie the
Woodgie.
cork out, like.
I love it. Woodgie.
I chose this because Saison is a farmhouse ale. It harkens back to the days when water would kill you, so people brewed beer, brewed low alcohol beer, and drank it throughout the day, and that's how they kept themselves hydrated.
And that foams up. Look at that.
Yeah, it's really highly carbonated. But it gradually has gone from, on the farm, you make beer with whatever you happen to have, and everybody's beer was different, to Saison being kind of a defined, recognized style. That style is it's very dry, it's very effervescent. You have peppery, like black peppery fermentation character. It's a really unique yeast strain that gives this peppery kind of citrus flavors. There's some really soft, grainy malt underneath. I love Saison. It's one of my favorite beer styles. The reason I chose this is because it's a farmhouse ale, and I know that this poem takes place in like modern day, but as I was reading it, the images that were conjured in my head were like 100 years ago or more in Europe or Mexico, and dragging this great big old oak table out into the yard, and it's full of earthenware, like dishes full of food, and everybody's gathered together. And so that's the images it brought up. So I figured a farmhouse ale like Saison du Pont is the appropriate beer.
That sounds like excellent reasoning, and I have a choice. I can wait 10 minutes for the froth to go down, or I can get a nice big mustache.
Yeah, get the foam mustache. Just go for it.
We'll go for the foam mustache. Cheers. Can you see it? Not much.
I don't know if you like this or not.
What do you think?
Remind me, do you know if I liked it last time?
I don't.
I have a feeling I might not have liked it so much last time, but you're getting me to develop a taste for beer, and I kind of like it this time.
All right, it's a great beer. This, like I
Bit
said,
of,
the
a tang.
What's that?
It's got a bit of a tang to it that I kind of.
That's that yeast. It's a
Okay.
really unique yeast strain that puts off some clearly identifiable flavors that when you taste it, it's like, oh, that's a Saison.
Okay, yeah, I like it. It wouldn't be my first choice. It's probably not in the top 10, but it's definitely not in the bottom 10 either.
Well, that's good because you have a great big bottle of it.
I know, and I can't let it go to waste. I'd have to go out on the street and offer it to people, and they'd look at me strangely. So I was surprised that as I was calling around up here, I think I called 7 different stores One store had the Saison. The rest of them had never heard of any of the three you picked. And the rest of the stores hadn't heard of the Saison DuPont either.
That's not surprising.
It was disappointing though, so
It is disappointing, but not
thrilled to
surprising.
death that I got the Saison DuPont. So thank you to the Mount Royal Bottle Shop and Beer Cave up in
There you
Duluth,
go.
Dakota. Yeah, I'll be going to them again. So we're ready for reading number 2.
Which is Kitchen Table. Close cousins drag the family farm table and 2 chairs from the perspiring inside out onto the soft July lawn, nearing moonrise, for a post-picnic talk under the stars near a lake in Becker County, Minnesota. One hand-carved oak leg of the table sinks under an elbow, pops up with the weight of the other's hand, and their spilled Chardonnay makes of laughter a leavening. Within moments, the glass pitcher, topped with their icy wine, sweats a faint water sheen and sets new dark circles, hastily hand-sopped, but soon enough set in the soft old wood already scarred with Uncle Siggy's initials the night his sister Linnea, arrived in 22. Excuse me again, the soft depression where the weekly bread was needed for decades. And the corduroy gouges set by the Alice Chalmers Model B engine Grandpa Joseph rebuilt during the harrowing winter of 1947. This evening, their soft, reverent voices recount the familiar old stories of beloved grandmother Astrid, or the stern, hired hand Paul, or the babies that died of diphtheria and the still that brewed hooch in the 30s when no grain would grow. Now the year's news, the mass shootings, hurricanes, starving polar bears, scares them equally, and with their heads close in the dark, the 2 talk over the faint, ghostly rings and unclaimed tattoos on the ancient table, while overhead, acorns dance on the northern red oaks growing slowly toward the farmhouse rooftop.
Very nice. And I think it's obvious to the readers where Michael came up with this beer. I think it's an excellent choice. I have a few reasons why I like this poem, why I think it's a good poem and I find it appealing. But I'm curious what you, as a poet, what do you think makes a poem good?
For me, I love when a poem makes me see something in a new way. When it helps me move toward a new feeling, where I'm seeing something new or hearing something new or understanding something in a new way.
Okay. I think this poem just, kind of by dumb luck maybe, or maybe because it's a good poem, it's an exhibit of what the article I was just referencing is talking about. It delivers this profound bit of wisdom without saying it straight out, that every era has its troubles and that people of every age have their fears and their problems. And my first question is, was that the message you as the poet intended, or is that only what I got out of it?
Yeah, the idea that, the wood that has taken generations through hard times and really scary times. I can only imagine what diphtheria was like. My grandmother Madline, my middle name is from her. She lost 2 of her 11 children to diphtheria. So yeah, and so but they got through it. Yeah, and it's a real story that they also, with 11 children, and they were farming in Stillwater, Minnesota. In the 30s, things were hard. And so my grandpa turned to, he put a still in the farm and the circular driveway. And he was driving, he had just dropped off a whole bunch. No, the story was that the revenue guys or the police or whatever had just come and inspected and didn't find anything. And Grandpa came in behind them on the circular drive with this stacks and stacks of sugar for the still. And he didn't get caught.
Oops.
Yeah.
Did they just not notice all that sugar there?
Well, they just it was just a miss in the circle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So they didn't even see him. So, and then my other question related to what I just asked was, do you typically start with an idea that you want to convey, this idea that each generation has its troubles? Or did you start with the table and the idea emerged from that, the kind of kernel of wisdom?
I started with the table, and the poem, kind of told me what it wanted to say. The poem, the grain of the wood, the ancient, and there is an actual oak table that's in our family. It has these scars on it. So yeah, I started with the table, and the poem told me what it wanted.
And I sort of felt that was probably the way it had worked. And that's actually part of the reason I like forms, is because a lot of times I'll start with an idea. And if I wrote in free form, I'd write that idea and never think of anything else. But when I'm writing in forms, I'm like, well, what works with rhythm, what works with rhyme scheme. And a lot of times I'll come up with something completely different that I didn't intend, but I really like. Right. So, this is a discussion I've had with other poets on our program. I'm a huge fan of forms, and I think free form is great too. I think they both need to be there. So what is your advice to other poets? What really drew me about this poem was how visual it is. It's very tactile. You can see it, you can hear it, you can smell it, you can almost touch that scoop in the table. And that drew me in. What is your advice to other poets on ways to draw a reader into a poem?
What I'm thinking of right off the bat is, we talked at the beginning about books and how we can't get to books, and but we're still buying books. And one of the things that I always do when I go to the library and I pick books, or when I go and buy it, and I get them home and I'm trying to decide which one to read first, I open all of them up and read the first paragraph. And I can always tell by the first paragraph if it's grabbed me. And how it grabs me is if it makes me smell something, if it makes me see something or taste something or feel something. And the very best ones that I just can't wait to get into are the ones that engage all my senses. That is what I would try to do.
I have a scene in one of my books that's actually, amazingly, the history is correct on this, where my two characters are trying to escape a medieval walled city in medieval times, and they're being hunted by the enemy. And it turns out that in Carlisle, there is actually recently discovered, like within, the past 10, 15 years, but just in time for my books when I was writing them, they discovered that there's actually this massive, huge sewer tunnel that comes out from under, I believe it's one of the houses that belonged to the monks in those days. It was just perfect. So, of course, I couldn't resist writing that that's how they escape. And of course, then you can't resist the pun. Holy shit. Yep, there is. And I typically
we just lost our clean rating on
I'm sorry. And I normally, what are we up to, like PG-12 or something now?
You brought a new scent to that phrase for me. Okay, so thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. I'm here for you. So you have just published your first book. What is it called?
It's called Girl Again.
Girl Again, that's right. And what motivated it?
I had just moved back here to my home in Wyndmere, North Dakota. I had been living down in the Twin Cities for a couple of years, working as a technical writer, and decided that now was the time to get back home and work on this. And I arrived back here in March of 2020. And March 1st of 2020. And 15 days later, we went into lockdown. And so I was looking for work in lockdown, and I just went, light bulb, now's the time to get all these poems in order. And I came across this publisher who in Facebook, other people had worked with this publisher. And so I pitched the idea to them and they said yes. So that's how that happened.
Congratulations. We are ready for beer number 3.
We're
Okay,
ready.
beer number 3. And it really is a shame that you did not find this one, Laura, because you would love it. So if you go to one of those stores that has never heard of it and you could get them to order it,
one of the stores up here, and it might be the Bottle Shop in Beer Cave, one of them has pretty much promised we can get you anything you want, but it might take a week or 2. So yes,
I never know that early.
Order this.
So this is from Weihenstephan in outside of Munich. It is the oldest continuously operating brewery in the world. Been making beer there since, well, they think they've been making beer there as a monastery since like 700.
Wow, that goes way back.
But it became a commercial brewery in 10 something. So they've been making beer for a long time. This is Corbinian. It is their Doppelbock. And man, it's delicious.
Rub it in.
This isn't really what I wanted to pour with this poem. I wanted to find something that is a beer that people probably would have been drinking in the Netherlands around the time that Rembrandt was alive. And you used to be able to find examples of that beer. There used to be a beer here called Jopenkoit that you could find relatively easily. Even a Total Wine had it. But the beer market's changed and it is no longer here. So I looked for something else that was kind of similar in. So when reading this poem, there's a very sort of contemplative, calming sense to the descriptions of Rembrandt's pencil marks, both as a beginning, and this poem kind of ends at the beginning. So as and an end, there's a contemplative calming at the beginning and the end with some jumble in the middle. And so Doppelbock is an old beer style going way, way back, originally brewed by monks, Paulaner monks, to get them through the Lenten fast. They drank beer.
Gives you some calories.
Rich, high alcohol, malt forward. There's almost no hop character in this, almost no bitterness in this at all. And it's caramel and toasted bread and plums and dark fruits, and it is really smooth. And Corbinian is a particular, I love double box, but Corbinian is a particularly great example of a double bock. And it has that same kind of contemplative sense that the poem has when you're writing about Rembrandt pencil marks. So,
cheers.
Cheers.
I was kind of distracted because I poured this Saison DuPont a little too fast and it foamed up all over the desk in front of me. I was frantically wiping it up while reading or while you were talking. So poem number 3, Rembrandt's Light. Go ahead.
Rembrandt's Light. A number 4 pencil drew his dark things. Hand rubbed shadows in the hollow parts of breastbone, lip, and temple. Black and blurry question marks that pocked the bedroom walls, and rows of daggery dots sketched hastily across inverted exclamation points, so heavily graphited that they dully pewterize. It was a fine tool for slashing, too, serrated the rumpled black-eyed page, my jagged rip, tear, and shred, distorted axis lines detailed on a cross-hatched hard edge, punctured and drained the living tint of human skin. But it was finally snapped into the back of an institutionally pink room where he took drawing lessons in a thin gown, was the used up eraser and splintered piece with the countersunk barewood molar marks that he put there himself. They calmly presented clean rag stock and a sharpened number 2, expected illuminations, promised me pastels. Came years then of the slow divergence from that old master, sometime hiding in hotels and in lights out rental cars on back streets, disappearing in broad daylight in between the stark lines of realism. Later came the courtrooms lined with the young lawyers brandishing their letters of metallic legalese in the days of carbon copied records, that slurry of pigments winding through offices in an Escherized procession, one hand shaking another, yet attached at a common source. There was no true perspective in those pen and ink times. Later still, I took up with the post-modernity of green polymers and wet acrylics, impressionistic streaks of cerise, some inspirations of celadon, and ever bolder hued, advanced into blocks of Mondrian order, despite more pencils, pens, and brushes with abstraction. When Rembrandt's light dawned plain and simple in my 57th year, like a shade lifted from the window of my dim study, this muddy, sensuous slip of earth finally settled in a true proportion, as under the steady, hot heat of a wood-fired kiln. I came to know this new element slowly, quietly, and greenly, like a tree budding in the earth on a hard spring, through a season of soft, holy rains and waving grasses, through a shimmer of autumn leaves aloft on its illuminating radiance. Then, those many years later, it transformed those shadows, silhouettes, and surfaces into this clear-eyed movement of easy coursing blood and balanced feet, wholly free-form, shine-faced, a girl again with a broom.
1 second, you picked the absolute wrong time to finish that poem. Can you let the dog out?
I have a doggy too.
I had it muted. I had just shouted, Chris. I think she needs to go out. She's hanging around, and this is always her sign. And if I don't let her out, she will go up to my music room and take care of herself.
Gotcha. Yep.
Actually, it's blocked off. She can't, but still don't want to leave the poor dog in pain. So what I found interesting about this and the previous poem, and just the fact that I happened to come across this article that I referenced, is I think each of these in their own way. One is very figurative. This one is much more figurative. And the previous one, The Kitchen Table, is much more literal. Yet they each require more thought than just straightforward prose that just tells you this is how it is, you know. So what drew you to Rembrandt?
You know, I've had a print of his Girl with a Broom.
Mm-hmm.
And it's and I love Rembrandt because his light is so real. He did not, you know, he didn't paint by you know, I've got one of these circle lights here. What are these things called? And you know, I've got all sorts of different illumination in my house right now.
Mm-hmm.
But he used daylight, and his clear imagery with that daylight, and also the soft, and how you would see things like the girl with the broom in such a low light was so incredible to me. And I think that's in the research that I had done about him was, you know, one of his, you know, accomplishments is and contributions to the art world of art was his use of light.
Okay. Are you also an artist?
No.
Oh, you're not.
No. I love art.
Yeah. Well, judging from the poem, I wondered if you were, because we shift in stanza 4. We go from talking about he and him and telling a story about someone else to all of a sudden we're in first person, and now it's me, it's I. So I'm assuming that the he in the first 3 paragraphs is Rembrandt? No. How?
No, the
know this.
The person that I'm writing about is my first husband, who was
Okay.
extremely physically violent. And what I'm doing is describing in artistic terms what happened to me. And then I'm also describing in artistic terms my escape.
Okay.
And the years of escape and the years of the legal issues that went on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you shift to the I, you are then referring to yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. Because when you said it's not Rembrandt, I started to wonder, so was it going from sort of the outside looking in to moving inside the head of this person?
Yeah.
And, having read a little bit of your bio, I figured that the legalese did refer to divorces and things. But I wasn't sure, just how autobiographical is this?
Sure.
And I think it's on the page about your book that it says your poems, your work are about transformation. And would you say that this is a piece more about the transformation of the person, of yourself, or is it more about the transformative power of art?
Gosh, I never thought about that. But, it is more about the transformation of the person, but the transformation of the art is another layer that I never even contemplated, but I think you're bringing up as maybe a valid idea. Yeah, wow.
That's what's interesting about, any art is that people do see different things in it. But I was thinking, because we're looking at a person, to me, it read like somebody's in a mental institution, that you're talking about. He
was
art. Oh, he was. Okay.
He was.
So that part was literal. I mean, this is a poem that is, like I said, much more perhaps esoteric, that it seems much more figurative, that maybe you shouldn't read it literally. But in this case, it was, at least that part of it.
Yeah.
And so, I wondered, is part of the point here that learning to draw, to paint, did that have some transformative impact? So you are working on your certification in poetry therapy. What are your thoughts on the transformative power of poetry? I guess we've kind of talked about that. What is your personal experience of being transformed or healed through poetry?
Oh, see, what jumps into my mind is the poems of Mary Oliver. They're very pedestrian and they're very, all over Facebook. But, her idea that I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to crawl on my hands and knees towards something like perfection is just like something I think so many of us need to hear. And and in the poetry therapy facilitations that I have, conducted and been a part of, I have witnessed people go, oh my gosh, I never thought of this before. Oh my gosh. I am welcome here in the family of man. I have a place here, and I'm obliquely quoting some more Mary Oliver. There's so many poems. She's just jumping into my mind right now, but there are so many poems that deliver me onto the doorstep of some new thought that I'd never had before, and I think that's powerful.
One of the things that I always find interesting about poets, and this is, maybe me personally, I think it's a whole lot scarier to put your poetry out into the world than your prose. Do you feel that way too? Do you think it generally is?
Yeah. I have to be prepared for it to be received by all different people who may or may not appreciate it. Yeah. But the thing that I had to do was just realize that once I let it go, I no longer really own it. It goes into the hands of other people. And the beauty of that is that when you disperse it into the hands of other people, they're going to use it like Play-Doh and make of it what they will. And, and that's powerful. Whether it
what would be your What would be your advice? You just published your first book of poetry. You've taken that major step. A lot of people write poetry, and a lot of them would love to publish a book of poetry. What would be your advice to them?
Don't give up. Keep going. Yeah, and when I announced to one of my poetry professors in undergraduate years and years ago that I had published this, he said, congratulations, and then he said, keep working. So, I'm not done.
So what is next for you then?
More.
More poetry?
More. Yeah.
Will it be along similar themes, or will you move to other themes, other kind of big general topics?
Yeah, I think I've, this is a study in this. And so I'm thinking more along the lines of nature and because I have strong feelings about the environment. So yeah, Mother Earth, that sort of thing.
So lots to work on. Chris and I were always full of more projects to do. It's good to have a goal and things to look forward to and want to keep doing in life. And this brings us up to the end of our program, just that fast.
Oh, that was quick. Michael, I want to thank you for those beers. I can't wait to go and buy them and try them. It made my mouth positively water. And
especially
Laura,
the Weihenstephaner.
And I want to thank you, Laura, for the great questions and
thank you.
The fabulous interview. You really helped me think about my own stuff in new ways. So, wow, thank you.
Well, that's high accolades. I'm glad. Before we go, we want to get your links where people can contact you.
So where can they find you?
I have a website, which is Christine Madline Ellsworth, all one word, .com.
And you should mention, or I'll mention for you since I already am. Christine is with a CH, and Madline is spelled Madline. So don't spell it like Madeline because it's not. And Ellsworth with 2 L's, and other than that, just like it sounds.
Thank you.
Michael, where can people find you and where can people find us?
I am at aperfectpint.net and aperfectpint on the socials that I don't do anything with. And we are at Book and Brews on Instagram. We are at Books and Brews with Laura Bosica and Michael Agnew on Facebook, and booksandbrews.net.
And, we also have a YouTube channel, which I believe is something like www.youtube.com/PTX1883 little something like that.
Y'all
You might
find
that, right? I'm sure everyone's writing that down quick. You might find it quicker if you just plug in Books and Brews. For me, we come up at the top of the chart, but there are actually a few YouTube channels called that. So you might have to scroll down a little bit. I probably find it first because I've been to it. Did you hear what my dog just did? Hear that? She just walked by and gave this huge belch like she'd been drinking the beer. It was really loud. I thought you would have heard that.
At least it wasn't a dog fart, because that's the worst.
Well, then, yeah, you would not have smelled it at least. Yeah. So you can find me at lauravos.com or bluebellschronicles.com takes you to the same site. I'm on Facebook, which I haven't been using a lot lately, but it's laura.bosica.author at Facebook. I think I'm on Instagram. In fact, I know I am, and I too never use it. And I'm on Twitter under Gabriel's Horn Books. So, Christine, do you have any events upcoming in December that you would like our audience to know about?
I don't have any in December, but in January, I will be having a 4-week poetry therapy event happening at the Red Door Art Gallery in Wapaton, North Dakota.
Okay. I don't really have any upcoming events. My book signing event is over. Gabriel's Horn is still accepting submissions for Startled by Love for 2021. Listeners can find that information. For some reason, you keep asking me if that link works, Michael, and telling me it doesn't. I go fix it, it works, and then it doesn't again. But
it always takes me to a Google Calendar page.
Really?
Yeah.
That's odd. It just takes me to the home page. But if you go to gabrielshornpress.com, go to news and events, and then scroll down to Poetry Anthology, you will find the submission information. The submission information is incorrect. You can submit until November 18th, since this won't go out till December. If anyone hears it wants to submit, I'll accept it if you just say you heard it on Books and Brews. And last question of the night.
Who's next month?
Next, Shannon Schroeder, unless it's pronounced Shannon Schrader, but I think it's Schroeder. Shannon is an occasional English teacher who also works as a part-time editor while raising her 3 kids. After the birth of baby number 2, Shannon resigned from teaching and fell in love with reading romance novels. She read so many books so quickly that her husband teased, if you're going to read so many, oops, I can't say that word or we'll sink down even farther in our ratings, PG-18. If you're going to read so many books, why don't you just write one? So she did. The 6th book, O'Leary series, is wrapped up, as well as 2 hot, nerdy new adult trilogies. She is currently working on her next series. So next month we will have a novelist.
Excellent. Looking forward to that. Christine, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for joining us. And I want to thank all of you out there for listening. This has been Brooks and Books. I always say Brooks for some reason.
Brooks and Brews.
Books and Brews, episode 32. Thank you for joining us. Cheers.